Hello, folks. So I'm going to try to do a weekly This Week in openSUSE. This is going to be the very first one because I think openSUSE is underrated, and I also think there's reasons for that. I won't go into that. However, I'm going to start with the openSUSE email from this week. It says, this week was interesting from an engineering point of view and involved some under the hood work, like reworking the kernel firmware packet into more than 30 smaller source packages. The benefit for the users, finally, only the kernel star package with the relevant blobs needs to be rebuilt and distributed. Before, they were all just the outcome of one large build, and their build counters were in sync. So updating firmware in package A resulted in also rebuilding B and having the users update this despite not having a single change. This is covered more in detail right here with this particular emailing. I've worked on reorganizing the packaging. Basically says the same thing. So far, kernel firmware star packages are updated the same version whenever some content of Linux firmware.get tree gets updated. It means even if only one or two files in the whole firmware tree are updated, all kernel firmware star packages had to get the version update. This has been annoyance, and this has been annoyance over years, and now I rework to really split the individual kernel firmware star packages. Namely, each kernel firmware star package is built individually in its own OBS repository. For example, kernel firmware AMD GPU is built in the kernel firmware AMD GPU, and no longer part of the big kernel firmware repo. Each repo contains the partial source generated from the Linux firmware Git tree. The update of each kernel firmware star package happens only when the contents are modified for the corresponding files. The version numbers are no longer the same among all kernel firmware packages. With this action, you shouldn't notice any practical difference. The package names and contents remain the same. However, the following it might influence for your setup. I'm going to send a delete request for the old kernel firmware package. The all firmware package are managed now in OBS kernel firmware project, and the kernel firmware packages in OBS kernel head and kernel head backport will be dropped. If you need the very latest firmware package, they can be taken from OBS kernel firmware project instead, where it serves both Tumbleweed and Leap 15.6. If you have an issue, let us know. So, very interesting in the point of now anything in the kernel firmware that you need on your computer, only that particular firmware blob will be updated on your computer. So that's a very good thing. As a part of this week, there will also be more user visible admin relevant updates like curl 8.12.1, Pipewire 1.3.82, Linux kernel.6.13.2 and 3, which you can see over here. I am currently running 6.13.3. Framework 6.11, I am currently running 6.11. SELinux 3.8, there's another update on this that I'll get to shortly. openSSL 3.2.4, Zipper 1.14.84. This now aborts DUP, distribution upgrade, in case of repositories not being available. If Zipper can't find a repository that you have set, it will abort the entire DUP. Either remove that repository that's offending or wait for it to come back online. PHP 8.3.17, PostgreSQL 17.3, and 12 has been removed from the repository. QEMU 6.2.1, Ruby 3.4.2, Systemd 257.3, and OpenSSH 9.9 P2. These items are now in staging and waiting for OBS to release them. Plasma 6.3.1. I am on KDE Plasma version 6.3.1. This email was sent yesterday, so apparently it got updated today. MariaDB 1172, Mesa 25, Boost 187, ZSTD 157, move to OpenMPI 5, glibc 2.41. Please help with help work out the errors in, and Python 3.13 as the default Python interpreter. Pending issues can be seen here. So that's from this the review this week from the openSUSE mailing list. Got it yesterday. Obviously, some of that has already changed. Let's talk about Reddit. Somebody on Reddit made a post that says, let's make Plasma Wayland the default in openSUSE. And it wasn't me this time. Finally. Lots of discussion, lots of upvotes. Most of the common comments are, as long as X11 is still available, I don't care. And that's the way it should be. Please make Wayland the default and make X still available for those who need it. X is a dinosaur and Wayland is the future. We need to move on to it. And the reason they did it the way they did it, when they moved from Plasma 5 to Plasma 6, they said they didn't want to change the default session to Wayland because they wanted to know what errors Plasma 5 to Plasma 6 was causing and make sure that it wasn't also part of the Wayland, changing the Wayland default. I think we're beyond that now, and I think Wayland needs to be the default. So I mentioned SELinux has some extra news coming, and then I'll get to that shortly. Here it is. Announcement: SELinux as default Mac system on new Tumbleweed installations. We would like to announce that the next openSUSE Tumbleweed Snapshot, the default mandatory access control system, MAC for short, selected by the installer, will be switched from AppArmor to SELinux in enforcing mode. Additionally, the openSUSE Tumbleweed Minimal VM will be shipped with SELinux in enforcing mode. So they're removing AppArmor as the default and changing the default to SELinux. This will only impact new installs. If your Tumbleweed is already installed, your Tumbleweed will not change from AppArmor to SELinux. Users installing openSUSE Tumbleweed via the ISO image will see SELinux in enforcing mode as default option in the installer. If the user prefers to use AppArmor instead of SELinux, they are still able to change the selection to AppArmor manually in the installer. AppArmor continues to be excellently maintained by Chris Boltz, exactly as before. Existing installations using AppArmor will not be migrated. In case the user wishes to migrate manually to SELinux, a guide is provided on the openSUSE wiki. Leap 15, anything. Leap 15 is not affected by this change in any way and will stay with AppArmor, which tells me that Leap 16, I'm sure, will be SELinux. We have tested the change manually and automatically via OpenQA. However, if you encounter any issues, let us know. Yada. So, changing from SELinux to AppArmor. I have no idea how this is going to impact anything. I already have my install running for a long time now, and it's not going to change automatically, and I'm not going to change it because I'm not going to fix what isn't broke. On the Slowroll side of things, collection of maintenance updates was released for Slowroll as of today. DDNet, Glue, Grub2, libqt5, Qt Web Engine, libxml2, Maven Assembly Plugin, PostgreSQL17, RPC3, RPM, Salt, Wireshark, X2X, XCB, Xcolors, Xsane, ZSH. These are just maintenance updates, not really new release. New snapshot release this morning for Tumbleweed. You can see the separation of the kernel firmware updates, separated AMD GPU, Bluetooth, MediaTek, network, platform, QCOM, and sound. So very cool. I think that's a very positive change for openSUSE. So that's going to do it for this week. This is the first episode. How I can improve it, please let me know. And if you watched it all the way through, please hit the YouTube buttons that we all know about, because they say I should ask you to. And other than that, as always, thank you so much for watching.